I didn't physically die. I did not have to physically die. I couldn't have for my sins, but I didn't physically die as a result of it. I mean, most certainly, it's like one old-time preacher, when asked, do you think that capital punishment is a deterrent to crime? He said, it is for the one they execute. Right? I mean, he's not going to be doing it anymore. And so I could certainly say I'm going to die to a sinful life by simply dying. But that's not what he says. He says, I was crucified, if you will, somewhat metaphorically, but practically and spiritually, I died to self, but I'm still alive. And so all of a sudden we have an immediate contrast. And he said, if you will, I was dead, I died again that I might be born again and live again. He takes us through this process of from death to life, no doubt pointing to the very same thing that he points to the Roman church when he said, in the same way at my conversion, at my baptism, when I was immersed in water, that what we often call the burial, that I was not only crucified with Christ, but I was buried with anticipation of what? A future resurrection. He says, so there is the long distance hope of life eternal, but he also echoes the words of Jesus, who said, I came to give you life and to give it more abundantly. Often misunderstood and unfortunately then never received by Christians is the idea that the only thing that Jesus came to offer us was a life beyond this life. But that's not what he says. Jesus said, I came to give you not only a quantity of life, eternity, but also a quality of life. And Paul simply puts it this way, that the life that I lived before was lacking. It was insufficient. It was not of significance. But now I have a life because I have been freed from this slavery. The only thing I can envision is a man who has spent a great deal of time incarcerated for a crime that he committed. No doubt about it, no miscarriage of justice. He wasn't innocent and wrongly accused, but he spends a great deal of time in which he is told where he can go and when he can go and what he can do when he's there. And after a period of time, he says, I was alive inside that box. But now that I have been released, guess what? It's life. I'm alive again. It is as if I emerged from a grave. He says, I have this life that comes because of Jesus. Let me put it this way. A life that is lived as a disciple of Jesus is a better life in this life as well as in the next life. As Christians, we should be enjoying the life that we have been given, because no longer are we carrying the burden of sin and guilt and judgment on our back. Doesn't mean we're reckless. In fact, Paul tells these very Galatians, we don't continue to sin that grace may abound. That would be foolishness. That would be ridiculous. But he says, guess what? He says, the burden of sin has been lifted, and though I was alive before, I am alive now. And so this contrast of from dead to alive, if you will, it almost serves as the bookends of what he says in the rest of the verse. And then he makes, if it will, though he is writing by inspiration, and I wished I could explain that to you. I can't fully. Because we have the nuances of Paul with the very exact words of God here on the printed page. But Paul makes a correction midstream. He says, I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Nope. Wait. Correction. It's not I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. In other words, it almost was as if Paul said, you know, the person that got me into all the trouble, that was me. I had to die to him that he might live again, and oh, wait a minute, I'm back to him again. I want you to think about Paul for just a moment. Paul has a pretty thick resume, at least spiritually speaking. And though Paul was not by any way, shape, or form sinless, Paul makes the case, he says, put my life up in front of any other Jew. He says, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews. That meant both his mother and father were from the beloved tribe of Benjamin. He says, as to those who were around me, I was an expert in the law. I was more zealous than any one of them. I was the top of the Jewish heap. We're not talking about a man that had spent his money on foolish living, a man who was engaged in one sinful activity. He's not a guy that we would consider wicked. He says, listen, amongst my people, amongst my countrymen, I was considered righteous. In fact, he would even go so far as to say, according to the law, I was innocent. Because I remind you that the law provided for those who made errors and mistakes to correct that through sacrifice. In other words, he says, listen, if there ever was a good Jew, I'm a good Jew. All I can ever think of is, and you just gave way to pride, congratulations. But the point is this. He says, I am a pretty good list liver. The law had all of its lists, all of its laws, all of its ceremonies, all of its guides and restrictions, all of the things that were to be done, and I did them all. My calendar was full, written by the very hand of God, of the things that I was supposed to do. I have all of these things that are going towards me and for me. And yet what? I stand guilty before God. This is the case that he makes early in the letter to the Roman church, and in which he says, simply put, it's this way. He says, the Jew lives according to the law, but no Jew can live the law perfectly, and as such is guilty. Because the Jews at the time were bragging that they had the law. And he says, well, the Gentiles don't have the law. They have a law unto themselves, but they can't keep law either. They're wicked. Jew agreed with that. And he turns over and said, you guys keep flashing your Jew card and saying, look, I'm a Jew. I mean, I want you to imagine that you're driving down the road and a highway patrolman pulls you over and says, speed limit here is 55 miles an hour. I've been clocking you for the last 10 minutes at 65 miles an hour. And I said, I appreciate that, but I want you to see something. I got a driver's license. And he says, yeah, I'm going to ask for that. No, I have a driver's license. That means I'm capable of driving. I don't need a ticket because I got a license, right? And that's what the Jews were doing. They were saying, I got a license. We're Jews. Circumcised on the 8th day, Paul said. Keepers of the law, those who belong to the covenant, got a license. And he said, but you were still going 65 in a 55 zone. So we make the case. All right, okay. I know I've been driving for 10 minutes, 10 miles over the speed limit. How about if I drive for 10 more minutes, 10 miles an hour under the speed limit? How about if I correct my mistake by undoing it? I won't speed anymore. In fact, I'll slow way down to make up. It doesn't work that way. Paul tells these very Galatians. I appreciate the way a friend of mine, Ed Wharton, who teaches the Sunset International Bible Institute, or did until his retirement about a year ago, he says, listen, he says, law condemns on the first infraction. Now, for all of you who think that, as one policeman put it, when it comes to speeding, 5 is fine, 9 you're mine. You know what that means? Maybe you've told your kids that this sign out there is a general recommendation. But the truth is this. If the speed limit is 55 and you go 55 and a half, you are a lawbreaker. And you can't undo being a lawbreaker by now being a law keeper. And I might add, probably because you won't be able to keep the law, you'll find yourself creeping up over it again. Because that's the constant battle that we have. constant battle to maintain self. So Paul says, here's what I have. I am, amongst my countrymen, the best list liver there is, but the truth is, I, like all the other list livers, I am guilty of sin. That makes me a law breaker. And not only does sin condemn on the first infraction, it can never justify, meaning you can't undo law breaking by now law living. And so he says this to the Roman church in Romans chapter 7, in at least for me, that is a common feeling. He says, beginning about verse 15, he says, I got a problem. He says, the very thing that I want to do seems to be the very thing I don't do. And the very thing that I know is wrong and I don't want to do it seems to be the very thing that I do. My mind and heart says, don't, and my body says, yes, yes, yes. And my mind says, do this, do this, do this. And the members of my body, as he described it, says, no, no, no. He comes to a point and he said, who is going to save me from the wretched man that I am? I want you to listen to a statement of hopelessness. He says, no matter how hard I try, I fail. No matter how good I do, I still make a mistake. No matter how much I want it, no matter how much I focus on it, no matter how much I try, I always come up short of what I'm supposed to be. It is the very epitome of hopelessness. And so he says, where is the power for me to live in perfection? And the answer is, within yourself, there is no power. In other words, the remission of sins provided by the blood of Christ at the time of our baptism only corrects the mistakes that are backward looking until we commit another sin. And then there's another sin, intentional or unintentional. And we speak often of the blood flowing both ways, not only in Scripture, but also both ways in our life, that it will continue to cleanse us of unrighteousness. But Paul says, without the person of Jesus Christ, I have no power to live lists. Now it is here that I will be asked kindly, would you not ever come back again? Because I want to challenge your thinking just a little bit. Here's what Paul says. Paul says, I lived like all of my Jewish brethren did according to the list that God gave. And here's what I learned from the Old Testament, from the old law. I can't live a list. And so now, under this new law, I have to rely on something other than list living. I have to rely on the power of Jesus Christ, not to help me live lists perfectly, but to perfect me in spite of my failures. But that's hard to live by. So what do? Let's find a new list, right? We'll take a New Testament list and we'll make it. They always come in fives, because preachers can do 5 acts of worship and 5 steps of salvation and 5 reasons. Those always are good for preaching material. So we make the list because I can do what? I can go, did it. Oops, I'm working on that one. Failed, right? Because this new thing is not a list living thing. It's relying on the power of God to perfect us in spite of our inability. Paul said, I am not capable, you are not capable, we are not capable of list living. Quit living by lists. Put your faith in the trust of the power of Jesus Christ. And so, as he speaks in Romans chapter 7, as I said, to that idea of, I can't, but I can with Jesus. And so when later he uses that very familiar passage of Scripture, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. He couldn't lift a car. I know that. And why was that? They didn't have, they did have cars. The apostles at one point were in one accord. But that was, anyway, that's a different preacher story. But the point is what? He says, I have to rely in the power to do what God has called me to do because it is impossible to do it. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And he continues and says, and the life which I now live in the flesh. Now, he's already introduced the concept that he died and is still alive, but he's saying something different, or at least something more here. He says, it's Christ that lives in me, and this renewed life, this regenerated life, this resurrected life, this life now has a whole new purpose. So we've seen life, we've seen death, we've seen life, we've seen power, now we see purpose. Do you know how many people in our world don't know why they're here? They're at the edge of a bottle or an edge of a ledge looking for some purpose to this life. And so it is that the fatalist says, you know what, life is tough and then you die, and people go, then why am I living it? Let me just escalate it to the end, to the death, and have this mess over because I don't have a purpose. Or they begin to establish any number, any series of purposes. My purpose on this life is to gain as much as I can from as many people as I can, as quickly as I can. My place is to have power or prestige or property. Mine is to educate myself to be the wisest there is. Maybe if I earn enough, save enough, insure enough, I can extend my life. You know what mine is? I'm going to go down. One of these days, I'm going to do the math on this. I drive by these 24-hour fitness places, and I see some of the same cars there. They go in the morning, they go in the night, and they go, well, I go in over there for an hour and a half and an hour and a half, and I add it all up, and they've been at the gym like 9 years of their life. And the doctor says, you have added like 3 years to your life. I said, no, you lost 6 years at the gym. I don't know how that math works out there, but it doesn't seem to me, but that's the point. The point is what? I have a renewed purpose. Listen, if there were nothing more out of following Jesus than he actually gives us purpose, it would be worth it if there was no eternity beyond. That's my thought. It's of no value. And Jesus took it and he refurbished it and he made it something of value. And if you don't think you have value, let me just tell you how it works with antiques. Let me tell you how it works with art. Let me tell you how it works with cars. A thing has the value based upon the price that someone is willing to pay for it. And God was willing to pay his very own life for you. That makes you priceless. And by the way, he did that when you were still broken down, still caught up in your sin, still not by any means at your best. And he said, I'll pay the full price. In fact, I'll pay the ultimate price. And so all of a sudden, we're the new and improved. We're the better than we've ever been. But not because of us, but because of Jesus Christ. And he finishes then with this statement. He says, and the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith, faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. He says, in this new life, I have the utmost confidence because no longer do I have the confidence in myself. My confidence is Jesus Christ who is sufficient. I have the ultimate comfort. Why? Not because I can protect myself, but because he looks over me. If there was a statement from Galatians 2:20 that would have greater significance, the greatest significance for us today, it would be this. Christians, relax. The world is a broken mess. It has been since the days of Adam and Eve, when literally every single person on the planet was rebelling against God. It is as wicked as it was in the days of Noah when God said, I'm going to wash that sin right out of the world, right? It was as wicked as the first century when these things were written and people were being killed as sport for the entertainment of others. The world is a broken mess. But there is peace, there is comfort, there is confidence. The entire subject matter of Paul's second letter to the Corinthians is relax. Even in the face of great difficulties, have confidence. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't. The answer is you can't do anything. But he can. And it may not be fix all of this world's problems the way we think he needs to fix this world's problems. I hear some people say, Lord, just come quickly. And I don't want to judge anybody, but in many respects, it's one of the most selfish statements that Christians ever make, which is, get me out of this. Any of you remember that old Jetson cartoon? Remember old George Jetson got on that space-age treadmill and he couldn't get off him? He'd say, Jane, get me off of this crazy thing. And that's how we are. We're just going like this. God, just get us out of here. And meanwhile, there's a world of people who are around us that don't yet know Jesus, and we're ready for him to come. So when you think about him coming to rescue you, remember he's bringing his judgment on all those who don't yet know Jesus Christ. How quick do you want him to come? It might be better for us to be like him, patient, waiting, working, that all may come to repentance before we say, get us out of here. But a life that is lived in a relationship with Jesus truly is a life that is confident in his power and comfortable in whatever he provides. The Apostle Paul to the Philippian church, as one writer put it, his sweetheart church, he says, I know what it's like to have plenty, and I know what it's like to have nothing. And he says, within that, I have found the secret of satisfaction. And this is what it is. That God has entrusted me a great work. And that's given me purpose. And that he's going to help me accomplish it. And that gives me great confidence. And the fact that this life is not going to last gives me great comfort. Whatever that duration would be, there awaits for me, as he told Timothy at the conclusion of Paul's own life, there awaits for me a victor's crown, not only for me, but for all who wait his appearing. Listen again. I have been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And this life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith. Faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Whether you take those words and memorize them is of little consequence to me. First of all, I'm not strong enough to put any of you on the pulpit to check it tonight. But I would that you would live by those words each and every day. For it is what it means to be a follower of Jesus in every respect, simply by that. That's my favorite memory verse, at least as I wanted to share tonight. I appreciate your attention. This late on a Wednesday, I usually get a lot of people praying. But maybe you didn't get dinner tonight, and that awaits you beyond this. So I'll just stop right there and turn it over for our closing prayer, any other remarks that the guys have here. But again, great to see you. I hope we'll see you again very soon, since I think we figured our house, from here to our house is 40 minutes, so we might just show up sometime unannounced. I need to check out that new preacher that you got. Oh, I wasn't supposed to tell DC yet, was I? That's all right. We'll tell him later. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.